Oh boy, here we go, I'm talking about Gundam again. Way back last year, I released a video giving you, gentle viewers, a brief primer on the existence of the Gundam franchise and where I thought was a good place for you to start. Feel free to click over to that video if you haven't seen it yet, because I'm going to try to avoid repeating myself. But the main purpose of the recommendations I made there was for someone who had heard of Gundam before and wanted to figure out the best place to jump in to get what fans might call the true Gundam experience. So of course I recommended starting with the Gundam film trilogy, the one that starts off the UC, or Universal Century timeline. But Universal Century is two major things. Really good, but really long. Trying to experience all UC has to offer is a lot of content to commit yourself to, and if you aren't that sold on Gundam just yet, it might be a bit too much. Though, despite what hardcore fans might have you believe, Gundam is not just the UC timeline. There are plenty of one-off universes where hotshot pilots strap into a Gundam to fight off some semblance of an impending conflict, scream at the top of their lungs about the defeat of their enemies, or telling Relena Peacecraft you're going to kill her.
I'll kill you.
That Gundam Wing clip never gets old. But the great thing about these one-shot universes is how accessible their separation from the greater Gundam universe makes them. You don't need to have seen hours upon hours of old Gundam from the 70s and the 80s to appreciate them, and in many ways, it's why I sometimes prefer them. So, ladies, gentlemen, and others, my name is Arcada, and today on Glass Reflection, I wanted to take one of these one-shot Gundam universes for a spin to quickly discuss another side of the Gundam franchise. And I figured, what better series to focus on than the very first Gundam I ever watched, Gundam 00. First, a summary, not of the show, but of Gundam's place in the universe. The year is 2007. Following the massive success of Gundam Wing back in 1995, Gundam as a franchise hit a couple of interesting snags in its ever-growing conquest to rule the world, or at least the mecha genre. After War, Gundam X had its original episode length cut down due to a diminishing audience. Turn A Gundam, while being notable for the return of Gundam's creator to the series and being quite acclaimed, including by me, wink wink, nudge nudge, it never reached the same heights culturally as that of Wing. Gundam Seed? Well, I could fill an entire video about Seed's problems, the pacing, the plot armor, destiny, but one of the most damning was the lack of a solid art style and heavy emphasis on reused footage. Gundam, of course, is known for its reusing of footage for production costs and the saving therein, but Seed took it to new extremes that, personally, I don't think played out all that well. Which brings us back to the year at hand. Sunrise wanted to somehow recapture the feeling of what Wing brought to the table while fixing some of their more recent mishaps. But they couldn't just copy Wing and give it a new coat of paint. The world had drastically changed since 1995, namely the rise and increased focus on terrorism in recent years. So setting up your Gundam pilots as terrorists might not be the best of ideas anymore, and revolving your narrative around a country that steadfastly believes in total pacifism is somewhat laughable at best. But instead of trying to avoid the topic of terrorism and the heightened military presence of the world at the time, Sunrise decided to come up with a Gundam plotline as an answer to that. Gundam 00 exists in the Anno Domini timeline, or AD, as in after death, as in Year of Our Lord, as in Jesus. It is the first time where the Gundam franchise really tries to connect Gundam to our world, albeit a futuristic version of one. Here, Earth is in a tense state. Large conglomerations of countries continue to develop and increase their military might, while smaller countries are regularly squashed underfoot in territorial skirmishes. There's a heavy focus on the geopolitical structure of the reigning superpowers and the control of 3 space elevators that, when connected to orbital fields of solar panels, are supposed to provide humans with enough clean energy for all. So, of course, people fight over it. The three major powers, the AEU of Europe and Africa, the Human Reform League of Asia, and the Union of America, are all vying for control, while countries that used to heavily prosper under fossil fuels have been tossed into poverty, strife, and bloodshed. This is where the Gundams come in. An organization calling themselves Celestial Being announces to the planet that they will intervene with any and all armed conflict with the goal of bringing war, all war, to an end. Accomplishing this by having at their disposal several highly advanced and virtually undefeatable mecha known as Gundams. It's a noble goal that leads both the audience and the opposing characters to ponder the contradiction of such a statement. Stopping all conflict by, in a way, creating more of it is a curious approach, one that the show's narrative takes great care in highlighting as the series progresses. The makeup of the Gundam pilots here is probably one of the biggest similarities to Wing that 00 has, as instead of our pilots being of the military or some other governmental body or national organization, the pilots are a ragtag band of specialists from all over the globe. Celestial Being is far more like a mercenary outfit than a highly trained military task force, but they all, in their own way, desire to end war at almost any cost, which is what brings them together. It's their personalities that set them apart. From the egotistical hard-ass to the smooth talker, the mental patient, and the kid with so much edge. He makes a point to use his middle initial in saying his name out loud, which he does. A lot. The viewpoints of the Gundam pilots and how they conflict with one another rather than band together in friendship adds to the tension brought up by a world that constantly asks the Gundam pilots why they are doing what they are doing, and is there even a point to it? It's one of the major things about the show's narrative that I will harshly defend. I love it a lot. Beyond the pilots, though, is an absolutely massive slew of secondary characters, which does make it a bit hard to keep track of all of them. From the top-heavy Celestial Being operators, the various leaders of military organizations and nations, to these two civilian characters. I'm sure they don't get any development as the show goes on. All of these players have a part to play in the overall narrative, as everyone on Earth instantly labels Celestial Being as international terrorists, despite their stated claim to want to stop all war and, several acts that did result in saving hundreds of lives. All because they stopped those in power from continuing their hold on said power. Well, this is at least how it was at the start. Because it's not ever simple. While some of the Gundam operations have very visible and obvious positive benefits to the world, many of them do not. As I mentioned before, one of the key questions that the narrative focuses on is what using violence on violence is going to accomplish exactly, especially when it in and of itself only just leads to more violence. It's a question that Gundam 00 doesn't necessarily answer. It seems to know that there is, of course, no easy answer to this question. On paper, seemingly stopping all conflict with a much larger show of force sounds somewhat logical, especially if the ones wielding said power would prefer to not actually use it, but this fails to take into account the desperation and frustration that the rest of the major powers will come to. And all it takes is for one of them to find the cracks in Celestial Being's armor, find the weaknesses of the Gundam, exploit it, and then suddenly things fall apart. The entire show's first season carries this weight and momentum with it, because even if it doesn't seem to have clear answers to the questions that it raises, it shows how important it is to bring up these questions for discussion regardless. It's able to weave its socio-political commentary and interventionalism politics into a form that is easier to digest and discuss, mostly by adding in teenage melodrama. And of course, it wouldn't be Gundam without plenty of action sequences. And it does, to its credit, make it through its entire first season without the use of any stock footage whatsoever. At least none that I saw. Gundam 00 was also the first Gundam series to be produced in both high definition and widescreen, making its eventual release onto Blu-ray all the sweeter. Speaking of that, as a side tangent here, another reason why I am talking about an 11-year-old Gundam series was because until recently, Western releases of it were either hard to find, or expensive, or both. Thankfully, a good chunk of the entire Gundam franchise has been making its way back to North America, and it's something that I am eternally thankful for. I never thought that I'd be able to see the day when a special edition Gundam set would not only exist, but be cheaper than the average Anyplace release. Now, if only Harmony Gold would give us back Macross. But back to Gundam. I would, of course, be remiss if I did not at least briefly discuss the second half of this content. Season 1 of 00 focuses much on the more political side of terrorism and violence, while Season 2 focuses a bit more on the religious side of things, and admittedly, it doesn't have as strong of a footing in that regard. It's not that Season 2 is a complete write-off, as much as some people might say, to just leave it at 1 and done. There are many loose ends to the initial season that did need to be cleared up and clarified. It just bothered me with particular things that had to be done to the narrative to properly facilitate that. This is where I subtly mention my disdain for the entire plotline involving Lock-on Stradios post-Season 1. The entire season was not so much bad as it was underwhelming following the great amount of momentum that Season 1 had at the end of it. Though, if anything, Season 2 is worth going through just to see the start of the follow-up film, Awakening of the Trailblazer. This is a film that starts off with a cartoonishly bad recreation of the Gundam 00 story in a morphed style that's like a cross between Gurren Lagann and Char's Counterattack. It's an in-universe film, but it still made me laugh. Now, the actual 00 film doesn't really answer any questions, and if anything, it makes particular aspects of the plot even worse. We have already determined that the biggest question Gundam 00 poses is one that can't really be answered by the show itself, but as a cap-off to the franchise, it's a solid 2 hours of Gundams being awesome, and really, it was the nice, refreshing break that I think the series needed. Of course, that's not the end of it. Back in April, Sunrise announced that 00 was going to be getting another new animated project, bringing back Seiji Mizushima to direct it. No word on if this is going to be another film, or perhaps an entire third season, which would be an interesting path for them to walk, but we'll have to keep our eyes open as time goes on. I will not claim that Gundam 00 is the best Gundam, and will only go so far as to recommend it to newcomers intimidated by the UC. Even if maybe the more recent Gundams like Iron-Blooded Orphans and even like jumping into Thunderbolt might be a better idea. There are still a few years yet where I will call 00 the most accessible Gundam series out there, due in part to its easy correlations to the real world and events within our world that just make this show easier to identify with. Even if not everybody likes this kind of socio-political commentary in a series where they would just rather have the flashy mecha action scenes. But it holds a very special place in my collection, even if it does mean my bias shows a little bit more than I would like. As usual, I will be putting streaming links down in the description so that you can go and more easily check out Gundam 00 if I have hopefully gotten you interested in doing such a thing. And I wanted to give a good shout out to my friends over at Right Stuff. Though they are not sponsoring this video, they were nice enough to provide me with a physical copy of the collector's edition for Gundam 00 in all of its glory. They've done these with a few Gundam shows now, and the attention to detail and extras with these editions are usually well worth it. I will say though, in full fairness, I would never recommend these large collector's edition sets to non-fans, but if you enjoy watching Gundam 00, it might be a worthwhile pickup. Of course, Red Stuff also has the regular Blu-ray editions if you just want the series without all the fancy stuff. If you have already checked out Gundam 00, then the two series that pop up the most in my mind to additionally recommend is both the entirety of Full Metal Panic, which covers many similar themes, just on a smaller scale and with far more humor added in for entertainment, alongside Macross Frontier, not only being a perfectly awesome series in its own right, but this also allows me to mention twice in a video that Harmony Gold needs to have the Macross rights pried from their hands. Like, I know a lot of people love Robotech. I get it. But can we live in a world where we have both? Please. Thank you. Lastly, a very special thanks to all of my patrons who not only support my work in general, but allow me to continue to do what I do. You guys are amazing, and I love and appreciate you all. Specifically, though, as I like to do, I wanted to give particular shoutouts to patrons Devin North, Joshua Garcia, Calhoun Boy, Sid Yamako, Victor Ekmark, Ryfen Bonaparte, and Rune Jacobson for being especially awesome. You guys are great, and until next time, ladies, gentlemen, and others, Ore wa Gundam da! And stay frosty. Later.